Do you ever feel like you've never stopped running? You scampered your way through high school, you kept up that pace in college, and then perhaps sprinted through the early years of your career, working long hours, having little time for little else. Well, for the next 25, 30 minutes, I invite you to take a break. And perhaps in the coming months, why not step back to think deeply about what you want from life, where you're headed, and what matters most to you? Now, that final question is at the heart of the Stanford MBA application, and it's an invitation. I always feel that it's a gift, and it encourages you to reflect on the future chapters of your life. My guest at Centre Court, Melissa Zhang, is quite a runner. She certainly was in the cross-country team in high school, and then headed to UC Berkeley to complete a dual degree in business and economics and the environment. After school, she joined BlackRock, where in the next 5 years, again, she was clearly on a fast track. Then she began her Stanford MBA, doubled up again, and included the MPA at the Harvard Kennedy School. And fueled by the startup fever at Stanford, she co-founded Rockfix, which is a carbon emissions removal startup with a GSB classmate and another member of the Stanford University community. Now she's joined the investment fund Azimuth Capital Management as a principal, and we're very lucky to have you with us, Melissa. That of course, was just a brief, fast pace of some of your background and experience, quite a journey. But give perhaps a little more color and a little more depth about the road that led you to business school.
Sure. Well, Matt, I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. Hello, everybody watching. I run much slower than how Matt describes, but do join me if you see me out in San Francisco, where I currently live. Um, I'll tell everybody a little bit about myself and hopefully help you as well on your reflections on where you are in life, with or without the MBA. Uh, so I'm originally from Hong Kong and have always had a passion for the environment, thanks to just being the daughter of a very nerdy academic dad who took me on a couple of his research trips, both in Southeast Asia, where we spent most of my childhood, but also to the Nordics, where his colleagues told 10-year-old me about, the melting glacial ice, as well as how to save lives when you see landslides and earthquakes from China to Japan. Um, I think subconsciously, I've always carried that with me as an interest as I enrolled in UC Berkeley, moving to the US and California for the first time. And I just remember there was a teacher called Sarah Botiger. She's now, I believe, with Bayer or McKinsey, who kind of planted this concept of, look, there are these indices that measure a company's financial record, but also their environmental, social governance characteristics. And back then I was a little bit lost. I was getting used to living in the Bay Area. It's, the tech hub, the sunshine, the clean air. And I think something just clicked in that class where I thought, okay, there is a way to marry my interest both in climate, but also my degree at Haas, the undergraduate business school at the time. So I took that with me as I looked for different roles back in the day. And I feel really lucky that I had started my career with BlackRock. This was well before the work I do now in the last 5 years in energy transition, because I think looking back, I started there in a hedge fund team and I thought, this has nothing to do with impact and environment. I'm not sure what I'm doing here, but I just had this incredible manager who, together with our 70-person investment team, really for me set the foundations of why and how capital is moved around from the investor to the pension endowment or sovereign wealth fund that is making very careful decisions around how they allocate their money for what purpose, and so on. So for example, in that world, a friend of mine now, he's a PE teacher down in Ventura in Los Angeles. His retirement is essentially guaranteed by the California teachers retirement system. So what they would do is set a goal for how they want their money allocated, and then BlackRock will be one of the companies that bids for a specific slice of that portfolio. So in my first job at BlackRock, that was just absolute return hedge funds. And then later on, in my current job at Azimuth Capital, where we do private equity investing in energy transition, there might be a sleeve, call it sustainable infrastructure, where we would bid for that business. So interestingly, there are some similarities and differences for me on both sides of the MBA journey. But certainly, I think I wouldn't be doing what I am now without having gone through that experience where I've just learned so much and also evolved as an individual.
Of course, a business school, but also this idea of converging of the world of business and the world of policy with the Kennedy School. I mean, was that also in your mind, thinking of combining the MBA with a program like the MBA at Kennedy?
Absolutely. So actually, I started Matt in the Stanford MBA and MS Environmental Science program. The MS has now folded nicely into the newly incorporated Doerr School of Sustainability, and they're fantastic. I highly encourage other folks interested in climate and energy to apply for the joint program. Um, for me, I didn't know the dual Kennedy School degree actually existed until a quarter into my first semester at Stanford. And, perhaps overly influenced by friends, a lot of my close friends were all applying for the MPA. And so I was like, okay, I'll give it a try. And, after getting the offer um, sometime in March, I mean, I was so happy, but I was also torn because I could only choose one of the dual degrees to pursue since the GSB wisely limits you to a dual degree, not a triple. And I think that makes a lot of sense. But I went with the Kennedy School because by then I had lived for about a decade on the West Coast. And I wanted to frankly expand the communities and types of thinking that I exposed myself to. And this was noticeable. I flew out to actually Cambridge, Massachusetts for a week. It was still sort of COVID, but I managed to, and people were so friendly just through classmates of classmates, meet a number of students who made me realize, wow, 90% of my incoming class at HKS do in fact come from the public sector, and maybe somewhere between 2/3 to 90%, depending on your industry. Whereas 90% of my GSB classmates were more private sector professionals. And so when the new semester started, and yes, you do move between the two coasts during this dual degree program, I felt like I was really in the best of both worlds. And I think being away from the West Coast, distance made me fonder and just more appreciative of what the GSB is really killer at, which is early stage innovation, kind of pushing its students to believe in themselves and work on the bleeding edge, and just to understand, for me in climate tech, how to spin something out of a lab, how to do that customer discovery. And I think the policy overlay that's really critical, which I really thank the Kennedy School for, is thinking more about broader stakeholders beyond who's on your cap table, beyond just the folks in agencies that give you the subsidies you need to survive as a company, but really what are the public benefits, the community benefits that matter beyond energy, maybe for AI or maybe for healthcare. And frankly, I didn't have that much interaction with public elected officials until going to Kennedy, where those are the leaders you engage more thoughtfully with, critically with. And even if you disagree, which you can't agree on everything with the speakers, I think holistically, I got to think more about who I am as a individual with my politics, my values, and my personal mission and how that ties into my career at HKS. Whereas the day-to-day work I do now in investing, I lean actually quite heavily, and I'm grateful for kind of my founder investor community from business school. So I think no matter which school you go to, you may have that experience as well. But it was a dream to have done both, and I would do it again.
After 10 years on the West Coast, you probably needed a whole new wardrobe for a lot cooler winters in Cambridge,
True.
Massachusetts.
Yeah,
You talk about both enabled you to think about things that mattered, but that's something that had begun already with the application to Stanford, as we alluded to earlier.
yeah.
This question about what matters most to you and why. Is that a real opportunity to step back, even connecting dots of the 10-year-old, thinking about glacial melt with your father in the Nordics, to applying to business school, and this invitation, as we said earlier, to really think about your sense of purpose?
Absolutely. So I currently mentor some, friends and individuals for free on their essays. And I do think for the GSB, that is such a defining and differentiating piece, which has forced me to think about my values. And I still go back to that piece of paper when I'm navigating periods of uncertainty now, just to think, okay, obviously what I knew 6 years ago when I was applying has now expanded. But I think it's still a good compass for figuring out what matters to me most and how do I keep my North Star aligned, hopefully into your 30s, 40s, 50s in the future. Um, I think at the in grad school, this idea of prioritization is really, really important. It's perfectly okay to come in not really knowing what you want to pivot into, but it's a great chance to develop a sense of who you are as a leader. And what really drives that, in my view, is core values. Um, there's kind of a couple takeaways that I think the dual degree experience has taught me. One is I'm always been a people person. And one of my fears the first time I flew out from Palo Alto to Cambridge is how do I keep track of my communities and my friends? Because now I have to do it twice. And so I think I really believe you're the sum, you're more than the sum of the five people you spend the most time with. And for me, family is a big part of that as well. So keeping those people close and making big life decisions is key. I think the second piece is really you can only really do one or two big things at a time. Um, there was there were 2 semesters in grad school when I was simultaneously getting my startup Rockfix off the ground, which I co-founded with a GSB classmate and a Stanford PhD chemistry, um, I guess, classmate. And that was a whole project in terms of we were incorporating the company through a pro bono legal program. We were hiring patent lawyers, filing the provisional patent, looking for lab space. We were hiring our first geologist while I was keeping track of a spreadsheet of about 50 venture investors that we wanted to open our data room to. So that kind of actually helped me with goal number one, which is I really spent quality time with a smaller group of people who were typically also building companies, or we were just really good friends. I just signed a book deal on writing a book about women leadership and climate. I had written no more than 10,000 words, and I ended up dropping that contract kind of 3 months before graduation because I just realized the startup took precedent. It was a very difficult thing to do. I needed coaching on how to just drop the contract, which was a bit embarrassing, but I learned you just can't do that much. And then there's the beautiful, fantastic array of core classes where you're really sitting in the classroom with some of the best academics and practitioners in the world. I think at Stanford, the most life-changing courses for me that you should take note of are Stanford Climate Ventures with the two Daves, Joel and Jane, decarbonizing the economy through project finance with Dave Rogers and Jeff Brown, and Kate Gordon and Alicia Seiger's climate infrastructure and politics course at the law school. So good. At the Kennedy School, there's a surprisingly heavy focus on good writing. I think there were 8 courses on writing. And that complemented what I was trying to do with the book. I loved man, his name is escaping me, but there's a class on behavioral economics, by Cass Sunstein at the law school, which was just fantastic. Anyways, classes, startup, book, socials, you're also there to, meet people. I did actually have a notion of a database. I think I got to 300 or so, just like interesting people I met and speakers during the time in grad school. My advice to kind of tie it up in a nice bow is, think about what are the opportunities that are no longer available to you once you walk away from those campus doors, and really focus on those things because they won't come again.
Well, with talk of a startup in your second year writing a book, you make me think of the former dean, John Levin, a lovely, lovely man who would sit down with students and say, "Hey, you don't all have to start a business." And he wasn't saying after the MBA; he was saying during the MBA. Now, is that sense of startup fever, is it palpable at the GSB?
Simple answer is yes, very, very palpable. Um, if you're somebody who, as you approach your applications, is thinking like, who, me, an entrepreneur? Never. Don't count yourself out because I was in your shoes, didn't think about it, just thought that's such a Stanford stereotype. But it's impossible to resist some of that. I call it inspiration. And certainly while I was on the East Coast, and I just realized, gosh, like this is the, competitive advantage of my Stanford experience, and I should double down on that. So when I came back, January of 22, it's funny, by then I felt like a third of the class had already found co-founders. And you do feel the FOMO of, man, who's kind of left over, for lack of a better word, in addition to people who have started dating. But it's a funny period where folks, there's kind of I should say that it's not easy to do when with my graduating classes kind of job outcomes spread at one pager. I think we set a record for number of students who became founders. I think that WhatsApp group used to be at 80 people. So that's about a fifth of the class, which is a little bit ridiculous. But a year out, when you really look at who's still there, that number has dropped quite a bit. And, I also went back into investing. We had raised close to $700,000 in just non-dilutive grants for our startup, the bulk of it from Breakthrough Energy's wonderful discovery program. But along the way, there were two things that happened for me, which was the founders, we don't always align on values and direction. And I think that's kind of an unspoken part of the entrepreneurial journey and the key reason that startups fail. But that being said, I'm so glad I had the experience because I've grown more ownership over the way I think about my responsibilities. I don't think I've ever been in another position where all the risk was tied to my decision making between me and my partners. And I also came to empathize more with management teams that I now meet on the other side of the table. When we do contracts, just having more understanding for why they behave in a certain way, and certainly more understanding for why even our firm's managing partner behaves in a certain way. And if there's anything that GSB has taught me through Graham Weaver's class, it is that, you have to hire superstars at the beginnings of these endeavors. It does make a big difference. So yes, the startup ecosystem, it's alive, it's well, it's palpable. I will say that now 1 or 2 years out, I don't think every problem should be solved by a startup. And actually, at least in energy, for those who are interested, I still believe strongly, and the advice I give to current students is you have to understand how the bread and butter of a business works before going into kind of the green or ESG version of it. Because ultimately the core incentives and in some cases, just system doesn't work if you just smack on, some transformation uplift. And I say that with BlackRock, I spent most of my time managing funds with no ESG mandate, and it helped me understand why where identify opportunities, but also challenges when we try and expand the product suite. to meet the climate needs of certain clients. I think similarly now with Azimuth Capital here in Menlo Park, we did grow out as a oil and gas fund for close to 21 years before launching our fifth fund, which is our first energy transition fund. And I can see how that experience in fossil fuels actually helps with our company incubation and investment identification with what's now called, climate tech, evolving or emerging energy, et cetera. I would just conclude with go for it, immerse in the Kool-Aid at the GSB, but know that kind of quietly underneath that bubble, there are plenty of other students and classmates pursuing equally important roles, in, I don't know, social impact, management consulting, a lot more search fund classmates as well, and AI. I can't do an interview without saying AI.
Well, in this interview, I'm going to try to pull together two threads. We've talked about people skills, and I suspect that your friends would say that one of Melissa's superpowers are your people skills. You also talked about the behavior of a CEO, empathy for the founder, alignment and values. And it feels like we're gravitating around interpersonal dynamics, the famous touchy-feely elective. Um, does all of that, you talked about being more than the sum of the parts of five people that you spend the most time with. What is the idea there that the company that you keep has such influence on your values or the things that you're focused on?
Absolutely. So I remember giving this tip to a friend's younger sister just this past Christmas for her personal essay for the GSB, which is you're a superstar, like female investor, also in clean tech. But what I think we need to emphasize more is your excitement to be a part of the GSB community and to give back to it in the future. I think the admissions team would agree with me that this is, and now as an alum, this is something we take so much pride in, and we are the company we keep. In hindsight, there's a couple of things that I'm grateful for from the GSB that I don't think I really valued enough as a student, which is it really is a second wave of adult friends. And I think psychologically, when you're a student, my thinking was, wow, this is the highest concentration of high quality, ambitious, and kind people that I've ever been around. And let me just absorb as much as I can from everyone around me. After graduating, you're still in the same 50 plus WhatsApp groups. Now I've exited some of them because kind of new things come up in life, but I'm super grateful for groups of folks who are, I don't know, becoming first-time mothers. We have a very small group of female PE investors who you can lean on when you're having, promotion conversations, compensation, and just do benchmarks. I think somebody forwarded a spreadsheet of maternity leave policies across 30 firms. And you have folks who are also making big geographic life changes who you can talk to. I think recently I tapped somebody to understand how to set up an SPV for a business matter. And that's just so powerful, especially when, for me, I pivoted in three ways from sector to function to who I'm facing in my day-to-day, which is more, energy engineers than quants. And so all of that has been super helpful. I think another piece, especially as someone who was an international student, is that don't underestimate the alumni base outside of the US. I've had some very energizing conversations with alumni about 1 to 2 decades above me back in Asia this past Christmas. And you just learn, especially in climate and energy, this is a very global value chain where you'd be surprised by where random alumni pop up who are helpful, both as, I think, human beings, but also mentors and potential business partners. So the GSB community prides itself in kind of the touchy-feely world. There's no doubt about that. And even if you don't get to take touchy-feely during your time there are in fact these 4-day weekends you can sign up for, which give you a condensed touchy-feely experience. And one of my gym friends, who is a classmate's partner, told me that he just did the 4-day course this past January. And my classmate literally tells him, you have really changed in the way that we interact as romantic partners. So it makes I think that really makes a difference in the way you show up in the world. And, to me, family and friends come above work. And I think being able to become a better person in that respect is very meaningful.
It really touches all walks of life. You talk about classmates, they're smart, they're intentional, they're kind. And that's a lovely thing to be able to say about 430 other people. How does that then play out in the myriad clubs, activities, and also perhaps the need to have a sense of priority, because there must be so many more things happening in a day than you could possibly fit in?
Yeah, I think what surprises me and many of my classmates who did come from these fairly intense jobs even before the GSB is that that intensity didn't quite pause when we became students. Um, it goes without saying, a lot of that is also fun and by choice. So I remember, where do we even begin? You really have to go in and know that you're allowed to take nights off by yourself if you're introverted, um, because you'll just be, flooded with incredible opportunities. For me, I was doing student leadership with the GSB Energy Club. I was learning to be a VC through the Impact Fund, where me and my roommate then closed a deal in Peel Labs, which produces t-shirt fiber from seaweed. You have like extra social classmates, which I don't think I am, who are planning these weekly beer pong nights in local Palo Alto. I went once for the record, just to say I've been there, but like that wasn't really my scene, to be quite honest. And during COVID, we had these much smaller gatherings, although there were almost every night, which was a lot of like 5 groups of 5. You cook in your own kitchen and just get to know each other. And you do these lots of one-on-one coffee chats in Google Calendars. So in addition, you're learning from some of the best professors in the world on macroeconomics, with Arvind. Who else? Innovation Endeavors. They teach a course around formation of new ventures. Scott Brady. And so trying to at least have some level of priority on your academics is also very important. So in the end, it comes down to, okay, how do I do this? And my system actually is every quarter I set myself a goal. I came in fairly focused on climate, and in my head there was a pie chart on what are the highest emitting sectors and how do I spend these 3 years by process of elimination, figuring out which of these sectors will capture my attention for at least 3 years post-grad school. I didn't think beyond that because it's impossible to plan. I think beyond 3 years at a time. And every semester, I just picked one sector to be a focus. So for example, I remember in the spring of 2021, I just got into the Impact Fund on the food and ag team. So I thought, okay, I'll focus on how climate and agriculture meet both challenge and solutions. And then the spring after, I was a teaching assistant for Stanford Climate Ventures. So there, I got to be mentored by one of the best venture investors in the climate ecosystem, Dave Danielson from Breakthrough. And I work closely with him and the teaching team just to see, wow, these 10 teams are going through 10 weeks of customer discovery. What does best in class feedback giving look like as an investor? And what does best in class ecosystem building look like? So I think if you break this big experience up into smaller chunks, while not giving yourself too much pressure to have to find your best friends immediately, everything will unfold in due course. And the last thing I'll say is, I think in undergrad at Berkeley, I underutilize my time with the faculty because I was navigating other areas of personal growth. And so one of my goals was to really get to know at least 3 faculty members more closely at each school. And they're just so generous. When I was leaving my startup and going through this phase that was quite tumultuous and soul searching on what do I do next, one of them, Dave, he gave me 90 minutes of his time to just think through, what are the key drivers of becoming an operator versus a deal maker in this near-term phase in my career. And it made, frankly, a huge difference for me. So when others come to me for advice, I really think about, how big of a difference can I make in their lives by chatting for 15, 30 minutes? And I have that mindset as well when folks approach me to review their essays or their applications. It's really about growing and then paying it forward. I think the last thing I do want to share, because I love this analogy, is Keith Hennessy is one of the most beloved policy professors at the GSB. He teaches freedom, democracy, and capitalism, and also the impact of US-China relations on business, both extremely topical right now. But I also, spoke with him about career advice. And this image he planted in my head was, Melissa, you're a ship sailing. And when you come to the GSB, many people think they're going to graduate and their ship's angle is going to change 160 degrees. And he said, in reality, you're really only going to shift directions by 2 degrees because it's just very difficult to become an expert in something in 2 years. But he said, that's not meant to be discouraging. But what you should know is that even with this 2-degree shift, when you sail out far enough, 2 decades into the future, you're going to look back and realize that you're in fact in a very different place from where you would have been had you not embarked on that very tiny directional change. And I think as I reflect on what I do now with Azimuth, with our portfolio companies, and just think about where I started with BlackRock, still investing, we're still being fiduciaries for other people's money, but the interface that I have with the world is now really quite different, given I'm visiting LNG terminals, combined cycle gas plants, and talking to folks who are moving molecules and moving atoms versus public securities. So for that, I'm really, really grateful. And I still remain open-minded on where I might apply myself in the next year or even 10 years.
You've given numerous examples, Melissa, of faculty that were very generous with the time that they have given. You've been very generous with the time that you've shared with us, because I think, beyond websites, FAQs, to actually hear this from the source and with the passion, with the energy that you bring. There's the reason why you work in the energy sector. And if you will allow me, I will send a copy of this video to your father so he can see where that 10-year-old has now shifted to, even if it was only 2 degrees. It may be a little more than that. It must be extraordinarily proud. And perhaps just a final word. Our viewers, of course, themselves from all over the world thinking about their next steps. They'll have heard many inspiring things with what you have shared. When it all comes down to it, you're making an investment in yourself in this race that we're all running, back to our metaphor. So how would you encourage people to think about taking that next step?
It's a great question. Maybe we'll keep it simple. One is apply. You don't know where you're going to land unless you're in the game. And so just do it. This will make a night and day difference to where you end up. I think the second piece I would share, and I'm still struggling with this. And I tell you, my mentors tell me they also struggle with this, but just don't fight your strengths. I think when you do your application, your final deliverables will reflect your unique value proposition as a professional and what values you represent. For me, as Matt said earlier, I've done many very analytical roles. I've done some Python during my time at BlackRock. But I think the feedback from my personal board of directors is your superpower is people skills. And so even with Azimuth, I spent a lot of time sourcing a good chunk of our investment pipeline in my first year here. But at the end of the day, I'm now responsible for our most senior relationships, both externally and internally, because that is where I shine. And I find it important to deliver to the needs of human beings around me and really help others fulfill their potential in their role. So my advice is don't fight that. There's really good opportunities to brush up on what we perceive as our weaknesses, both in grad school and outside, obviously. Take advantage of that because it gives you confidence. But your unique value proposition will change over time. And I'm really excited to see what you build by leaning into who you are and what matters to you most and why, I suppose.
Well, I think that we're very fortunate to have had a taste of that superpower of yours. That your board is absolutely right. Thank you. Thank you for joining us at Centre Court to share a snapshot of that journey with so much insight, with so much warmth and encouragement. It was an absolute pleasure to have this discussion together.
Thank you so much, Matt. It was really my honor.